I will not go to jail. That's what he said. In front of the judge. In front of his dead parents' friends. In front of a courtroom packed with journalists, camera crews, and weeping relatives. Nick Reiner, son of beloved director Rob Reiner and actress Michelle Singer, stood tall, chin up, voice calm. No tremble. No apology. Just 5 cold words. I will not go to jail. Let that sit with you for a second. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because that moment didn't just shift the energy in the courtroom. It split reality in two. One world, where justice meant retribution. The other, where wealth, fame, and family legacies bought something else entirely. But before we get there, we need to go back. Back to a mansion in Brentwood. Back to a blood-soaked crime scene. Back to a family that looked perfect. Until it shattered from within. Because what happened inside that $13.5 million estate wasn't just a tragedy. It was a statement. And the man accused of making it isn't backing down. The night, everything changed. It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday. No Hollywood premieres. No political fundraisers. Just a wealthy couple in their 70s, winding down their weekend in one of LA's most exclusive zip codes. Rob Reiner, 78. Michelle Singer, 70. Married nearly 4 decades. Parents to Nick and Romy. Friends to presidents, producers, and the kind of neighbors who throw $10,000 plate dinners for campaign funds. By all accounts, they were homebodies that night. The cameras caught them returning around 5:42 p.m. No staff were scheduled to stay late. Security logs show all gates were locked. But at 9:13 p.m., precisely, the estate's primary security camera feed went dark. 17 minutes later, a 911 call came from a housekeeper arriving early for her Monday shift. Her voice, "We won't play the full tape," was pure panic. "There's blood everywhere. On the floors. Oh my God. He's not breathing. I think they're both. Oh my God." Dispatchers couldn't even get her to finish the sentence. By the time emergency crews arrived, it was too late. Rob was slumped over the arm of the living room couch, multiple stab wounds across his torso and neck. Michelle lay near the base of the staircase. Her eyes were open. Her hands had tried to fight back. But she hadn't made it far. The guest house. Now let's talk about the guest house. Set on the far end of the Brentwood estate, this separate structure had its own entrance, kitchen, and privacy hedges, almost like a house within a house. And that's where Nick Reiner lived. Nick, 32, aspiring filmmaker, son of Hollywood royalty. He'd bounced between rehab stints and low-budget film projects for years. No one ever quite figured him out. Some said he was a sensitive artist, misunderstood and struggling. Others said he was angry, dangerous, a walking contradiction, one foot in luxury, one in despair. Police found him sitting on the guest house couch. Calm, silent. Blood was on his shirt. There were scratches on his forearms. And a steak knife was found soaking in bleach in the guest house kitchen sink. When officers entered, Nick reportedly turned slowly, looked them straight in the eyes, and said only one sentence. "Is it over?" What did that mean? No one knew. Not then. Not fully. But it would haunt every interview, every hearing, and every YouTube true crime theory that exploded in the days that followed. Who is Nick Reiner, really? You may think you know the Reiner name. Rob Reiner gave us The Princess Bride. A Few Good Men. When Harry Met Sally. He stood for liberal values, fought for free speech, produced documentaries calling out government corruption. He was Hollywood good, if there is such a thing. But Nick? Nick never fit the script. In interviews, Rob used to say Nick had a unique sensitivity. But there were whispers, early on, of trouble. A school incident here. A rehab stay there. An explosive fight with a girlfriend that got buried quickly. Nick wasn't famous, but he was watched. And in the months leading up to the murders, something shifted. He stopped attending therapy, stopped showing up for family dinners. Neighbors said they heard shouting late at night. And one source, unconfirmed, claimed Michelle had recently asked a private investigator to look into Nick's behavior. But no one expected violence. Not until the autopsy reports dropped. The autopsies, brutality defined. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office confirmed it. Rob and Michelle Reiner died of multiple sharp force injuries. That's not an accident. That's not a slip or a fall or a kitchen disaster. That's murder. Blunt. Repetitive. Intentional. Overkill. And yet, when Nick stood in that courtroom, after being arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, he didn't cry. He didn't shake. He just spoke. The courtroom silence. Picture this. Rows of media. Legal analysts scribbling notes. Flashes from the press pool. And in the middle, Nick Reiner in a gray button-down, not orange prison garb, out on bail, courtesy of one of LA's most expensive defense teams. The judge asks how he pleads. His lawyer leans in, whispers something. Nick looks up, clears his throat, and says it. I will not go to jail. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't defiance. It was a statement of fact, like he knew something we didn't. And maybe he did, because what came next wasn't just a defense. It was a story, one that involved secret diaries, audio tapes, conflicting autopsy timelines, and even missing security footage. One where Nick claimed that he wasn't the real threat in that house. But that's a story we'll unpack, chapter by chapter. Because Nick Reiner didn't just break his silence in court. He broke something deeper, the illusion that fame protects, or that family means safety. He didn't whisper. He declared. And now, we're left to untangle the wreckage. Because this isn't just a true crime story. It's a Hollywood betrayal. One that begins with a scream and ends with a secret. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What really happened between 9:13 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. inside the Reiner estate? We know what the headlines say. We've heard the official police timeline. But there's a gap, 17 minutes, where the cameras cut out, the alarm stayed silent, and 2 beloved icons were butchered in their own home. How does that happen? And more importantly, why? The night begins. It started like any other Sunday. Rob and Michelle Reiner were known for their routines. They weren't the kind of Hollywood elite who partied late or vanished to exotic retreats. They liked their home, their space, their rituals. Dinner was always around 6 p.m., usually cooked by Michelle herself, unless they had guests or staff. They'd eat in the sunroom, watch MSNBC, maybe sip on wine if they were feeling loose. At 5:42 p.m., the Reiners returned home after visiting friends in West Hollywood. Footage shows them smiling, laughing. Michelle held a small bouquet of white lilies. Rob opened the front gate from the driver's seat himself. They had no idea that less than 4 hours later, their lives would end. The call. At 9:30 p.m., the Brentwood 911 operator received the call. It was chaos. The housekeeper, Lupe Delgado, had arrived early for Monday prep. But when she stepped inside, she smelled something metallic. Acrid. She thought it was bleach. But then she saw the body. Her scream, captured on the 911 tape, pierced the dispatcher's headset. It wasn't just fear. It was betrayal. Shock. The kind of sound people make when the world doesn't make sense anymore. I see blood. On the floor. He's, oh God. Oh God. By the time paramedics arrived, both Rob and Michelle were pronounced dead. Time of death, estimated between 9 o'clock and 9:25 p.m. And here's where it gets disturbing. The bodies. Rob Reiner's body was found slumped over the edge of the living room couch. Multiple stab wounds to the chest. 3 to the abdomen. 2 defensive cuts on his right hand. Meaning he fought back. But the killing blow? A deep slash across the neck. Almost surgical. Michelle was found face down near the stairs. She had blood on her nightgown. Her left hand was broken, consistent with a hard fall or struggle. 12 stab wounds. None fatal on their own, but together fatal. She bled out before help could arrive. There were no signs of forced entry. No valuables stolen. No alarms triggered. This wasn't a robbery. It was personal. The guest house, untouched. Now here's where the story takes its first chilling turn. While the main house was a war zone of blood and broken glass, the guest house was silent. And inside, Nick Reiner, alone, wearing a gray t-shirt. Blood splattered across the front. No shoes. Officers said he didn't run, didn't hide, didn't even ask why they were there. He opened the door, looked at them, and calmly said, "Is it over? Is it over?" What does that mean? Was he referring to the attack? Or something else? A nightmare he believed had ended? A chapter closed? We'll explore Nick's mental state in a later chapter. Trust me, there's a lot to unpack. But in this moment, that phrase was enough to send chills through even seasoned homicide detectives. Especially considering what they found in the guest house sink. The knife. A 9-inch chef's knife. Soaked in bleach. still warm to the touch. It matched the wounds. LAPD forensics confirmed it had traces of Rob and Michelle's blood. But they also noted something strange. There were no fingerprints. Not Nick's. Not anyone's. Completely wiped. But here's the contradiction. Nick's shirt was soaked in blood, and scratches lined his forearms. How do you clean the knife, but forget yourself? Sloppy mistake? Or stage setup? Hold on to that thought. Because the evidence doesn't stop there. The scene of the crime. The living room was in disarray. Furniture overturned. A broken wine glass on the floor. Blood splatters on the rug and wall, the pattern suggesting a struggle. And yet, no signs of forced entry. No busted locks. Nothing stolen. Which led police to one conclusion. The killer was already inside. And the only other person living on the estate was Nick. The autopsy report. According to the coroner, Rob and Michelle died within minutes of each other. But here's the twist. Based on blood oxygen levels, it appears Rob was killed first. That matters, because it suggests a sequence. Whoever did this didn't panic after one stabbing. They kept going, from Rob to Michelle, with deliberate, cold focus. That's not rage. That's not impulse. That's intent, which makes Nick's calm demeanor even harder to ignore. And then there's the camera outage. Camera blackout. As mentioned earlier, the estate's security system experienced a mysterious blackout between 9:13 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. All footage gone. No backup feed. No motion alerts. Nothing. Now ask yourself, coincidence? Or timed sabotage? Investigators believe the system was disabled from the inside. Someone who knew the codes, knew the layout, knew the blind spots. Again, that points inward. But wait, there's a dog. Here's a fact that didn't make headlines. The Reiners had a dog. A golden retriever named Penny. Penny was found hiding under the dining table. Unharmed. Shaking. Dogs bark at intruders. They react to violence. So why didn't the neighbors hear barking? Was Penny familiar with the killer? Or was she drugged? Toxicology showed no sedatives, which only deepens the mystery. Why was she quiet? Why didn't she warn them? Unless the killer knew how to calm her. Unless it was someone she loved. A family affair. Look, no one wants to believe the son did it. Not in this story. Not in any story. We want someone from the outside. A stalker. A stranger. A home invader. But that's not what the evidence shows. No one broke in. No one fled. And Nick was right there. So now we have to ask the unthinkable. What would push a man to kill his parents? Revenge? Mental illness? Desperation? Or something else entirely? We'll dig deep into Nick's past soon. His childhood. His trauma. The diary. But for now, we sit with this moment. Two parents. Slaughtered in their home. A son. Standing silent in the guest house. A knife. Washed clean. A camera. Disabled. And a sentence that still echoes in our minds. Is it over? But what happened next? Didn't bring answers. It brought even more questions. Because just days later, detectives would uncover a hidden journal. And what was written inside would turn this case upside down. What if the truth wasn't spoken in court, but scribbled in secret behind a locked guest house door? In every true crime story, there's always a turning point. A moment where the narrative snaps. Where what we thought we knew crumbles under the weight of something darker. For Nick Reiner, that moment came when detectives opened the drawer beside his bed. Inside was a black leather-bound journal. Unlabeled. No title. No name. Just pages, dozens of them, filled with jagged, obsessive handwriting. The guest house diaries. And what was written inside would make jurors shiver. A window into madness. Or something worse. Let's back up. Nick Reiner had lived in the guest house on his parents' property for almost 18 months. To outsiders, it was a generous gesture. Parents supporting their struggling adult son as he recovered from addiction and tried to get his life back on track. But to insiders, it was something else. It wasn't charity, one family friend whispered to local reporters. It was containment. That's right. There had been incidents. Yelling, shouting matches, threats. But Michelle was the type to protect her children fiercely, maybe to a fault. She insisted Nick was healing, that he just needed a safe space. But the guest house became more than a refuge. It became a fortress. And inside, Nick was writing. The first entry. The earliest entry in the journal is dated August 17, 2024. It reads, "Mom doesn't trust me. I see it in her eyes. They don't knock anymore before they come in. I'm 32, not 12. But maybe if I show them who I really am, they'll stop pretending I'm broken. Just a few lines. But already, it sets a tone. There's paranoia, resentment, a growing storm. As the months go on, the entries grow longer, angrier, more fragmented. Some pages are covered in scratches. Some switch between upper and lowercase mid-sentence. Some include hand-drawn faces, crude, staring, always frowning. And one word keeps repeating over and over. They lied. But what lies? That's what prosecutors wanted to know. What were Rob and Michelle lying about? Were these the delusions of a paranoid man? Or the clues to a deeper family fracture? On November 3rd, Nick wrote, "Dad still thinks I'm weak. He tells his friends I'll never be what he was. But what was he? A liar in a suit. Everyone sees the hero. I see the monster." That entry made it into evidence. It was read aloud during the pre-trial hearing, and gasps filled the courtroom. Because up until that moment, the public thought this was just a case of mental decline, a tragic accident by a disturbed son. But this entry, and the ones that followed, told a different story. One of bitterness, of a growing vendetta, of a son who believed he was owed something, and was ready to take it. The red-marked entry. There's one page that investigators found especially chilling. It's dated December 8th, 2024, 5 weeks before the murders. I hear them at night, talking about me like I'm not real, like I'm a disease they're tired of hiding. Do we cut him off? She said. Do we make him leave? He didn't answer. He never does. He just lets her do the dirty work. But I won't go quietly. They don't get to abandon me. Not after everything. In the top right corner of the page, there's a red ink circle around the date. Investigators believe this could have been a marker, a signal to himself, a countdown. Because here's the kicker. On December 9th, a day after that entry, Michelle emailed her attorney. The subject line? Options for eviction. A secret no one was supposed to see. Nick was never supposed to read that email. But digital forensics later showed something startling. He did. A mirror login from a guesthouse IP address revealed Michelle's email account was accessed briefly just 2 hours after she wrote the draft. She never mentioned it to anyone. She may have assumed it was safe. But Nick saw it. He knew. And 2 days later, he stopped writing in the journal. Not another word. Nothing until the day of the murders. Then suddenly, a single page. A short, horrifying sentence scrawled across the center in all caps. You abandoned me. You don't get to leave first. Who found the journal? The journal wasn't discovered immediately. In fact, during the first sweep of the guest house, it was overlooked. Only during a second, more invasive search, conducted after Nick's court outburst, did investigators pull open the locked drawer and find it. It had been hidden beneath a pile of receipts, old screenplays, and a half-empty bottle of lithium. Some say it was a mistake that it wasn't found sooner. Others say it was fate. Because by then, the narrative had already begun to unravel. Mental health or murder? Nick's legal team used the journal as evidence of diminished capacity. They argued he was mentally unwell, that the diary showed signs of manic behavior, delusion, and untreated psychosis. But the prosecution pushed back. They brought in handwriting analysts, psychologists, profilers. Their conclusion? This wasn't the work of a man in psychosis. It was planning. It was obsession. It was revenge. They pointed to the consistent entries, the timeline matching events in the household, and the disturbing level of clarity in each passage. One expert testified, "This isn't a mind unraveling. This is a mind preparing. This was a manifesto in slow motion." Audio versus ink. Here's where the contradictions begin to mount. Because while the journal paints Rob and Michelle as cold, dismissive, even cruel, audio tapes from inside the main house, recorded by the estate's smart speaker system, tell a different story. In one captured moment, Rob can be heard saying, "He's my son. I know he's struggling, but we don't abandon family." Michelle replies, "I'm scared, Rob. Sometimes he just looks at me like I'm a stranger. Like he hates me." Two parents. One wants to help. One wants to protect herself. And in the middle, a son spiraling. A family splitting from the inside out. So here's the emotional contradiction. Were Rob and Michelle cold and calculating, as Nick's diary claimed? Or were they aging parents trying to navigate the emotional minefield of loving someone who might hurt them? Can both be true? That's the tension that haunts this case. The diary is proof, yes. But of what? Premeditation? Or a cry for help that no one answered? Back to the courtroom. When the journal was entered into evidence, Nick sat motionless. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Rob Reiner, his sister, was in the courtroom that day. She left during the third entry. Couldn't listen anymore. Reporters said she was weeping in the hallway, whispering to her attorney. He wrote all that while we were upstairs, while we were trying to help. And then, the sketches. Oh yes, we haven't even talked about the sketches. At the back of the journal were 6 pages filled with drawings. Faces, all with XS through the eyes. One face had glasses and a strong jaw, widely believed to represent Rob. Another had long hair and pearl earrings, unmistakably Michelle. But one page? Just a mirror. And below it, in red ink, I told you not to look away. Creepy? Yes, but also a possible insight into Nick's fractured state of mind. Was he blaming himself? Or issuing a threat? But what came next would rip this case wide open. Because just when everyone thought they had their answer, another journal appeared. Not from Nick, but from someone else in the house. And inside it was a letter. A letter never meant to be opened. Until now. What happens when silence breaks, and what spills out isn't remorse, but defiance. For 72 hours after his arrest, Nick Reiner said almost nothing. No press statements. No tears. Not even a whisper of "not guilty" from his own lips. He sat in that sterile interrogation room, stone-faced, flanked by 2 high-priced attorneys flown in from New York. And while the media churned through gossip, speculation, and leaked autopsy reports, Nick remained mute. Until day 1 of the arraignment. Until that moment. Until 5 words shattered the courtroom like glass. I will not go to jail. But what really happened inside the courthouse that morning? What led to that explosive declaration? And what did it reveal? Not just about the case, but about the man at the center of this storm. Let's step inside the courtroom. Let's sit in the front row. Let's rewind to the exact moment when Nick Reiner broke his silence. The arrival. It was raining in Los Angeles that day. A rare kind of rain, heavy, cold, cleansing. The courthouse steps were lined with media vans and protesters. Some held signs that read "Justice for Rob and Michelle." Others wore masks with duct tape excess over their mouths. A haunting protest against what they saw as another case of celebrity justice. Inside Department 9B, the air was thick. Journalists, spectators, court sketch artists jostling for angles. Everyone whispering the same thing. Will he plead guilty? Will he show emotion? Will he even speak? And then Nick entered. The look. He wore a slate gray suit. No tie. Crisp white shirt, buttoned to the top. No cuffs. No jumpsuit. Why? His team had posted the $5 million bail within hours of his arrest. His hair was slicked back. His eyes cold and unreadable. But the most unsettling part? The way he scanned the courtroom. Not nervously. Not fearfully. Calculated. Controlled. He made eye contact with every person in the first row. Reporters, former family friends, even his sister Romy, before taking his seat at the defense table. Then came the judge. Honorable Celeste Navarro. No nonsense. Known for her refusal to bend to celebrity influence. And she wasn't in the mood for theatrics. Court is now in session, she began. The Reiner double homicide case was officially underway. The charges. The prosecutor, Deputy District Attorney Janelle Brooks, stepped forward and read the charges. 2 counts of first-degree murder. Use of a deadly weapon. Aggravating circumstances. Multiple victims. Premeditation. Familial relation. The courtroom was silent. Every breath felt held. Then came the moment. Judge Navarro turned to Nick and said, "Mr. Reiner, how do you plead?" For a second, he didn't move. His lawyer leaned in. But Nick raised a hand, signaling he would speak. The outburst. He stood, straightened his shirt cuffs, took a single step forward. And in a voice that was neither shaky nor loud, just disturbingly calm, he said, "I will not go to jail." Gasps erupted. Courtroom security shifted. Cameras clicked. Romy's hand flew to her mouth. Judge Navarro banged her gavel. "Mr. Reiner, I did not ask for a statement. I asked for a plea." Nick didn't blink. He simply turned, looked at the gallery, and then whispered to his lawyer, "Not guilty." His attorney, Kenneth Malloy, then repeated it for the record. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty on all counts." But no one was listening anymore. Because those 5 words, "I will not go to jail," had already gone viral. By noon, they were trending across Twitter, Reddit, YouTube, and every crime podcast in America. But why did he say it? Why that phrase? And why then? A message or a meltdown? Speculation spread like wildfire. Was Nick threatening the court? Predicting a legal technicality? Or was it some kind of psychotic break? The prosecution had a theory that Nick wasn't crazy. He was calculated. That statement wasn't accidental. It was the first move in a psychological chess match. A message to everyone watching. I'm not sorry, and you can't touch me. But his defense had a different spin. They claimed the statement was a symptom, not a strategy. Nick, they argued, was suffering from delusional disorder. A break from reality triggered by years of trauma, emotional isolation, and untreated mental illness. They called it shield language, an instinctive phrase used by psychotic patients when facing perceived threats. "I will not go to jail" wasn't a boast. It was a plea. So which is it? Calculated defiance? Or fractured delusion? The first witness, a friend turned foe. The arraignment wasn't meant to have witnesses. But the DA made a surprise motion to submit a statement from a former close friend of Nick, Jacob Farrow, a screenwriter, former roommate, now estranged. The judge allowed a brief read-in. Jacob's words stunned the court. Nick used to say that his parents were just placeholders, that they stood between him and his real life. Once, when we were drinking, he joked, "I won't be free until they're gone. Maybe I'll send them off in a blaze of Hollywood irony, like a script I never got to finish." At the time, I thought it was a joke. Not everyone laughed, especially not when the DA revealed Jacob had already passed a polygraph. The sketchbook slip. Then, as if the day weren't chaotic enough, the press got a hold of leaked photos from Nick's sketchbook. Yes, another piece of disturbing evidence. Among the drawings, a floor plan of the Reiner estate. Arrows, entry points, a timeline scribbled on the side. 9 p.m., lights out. 9:15 p.m., entry. 9:20 p.m., silence. One sketch had 2 stick figures, lying in pools of red. Underneath it, the phrase, "Sometimes silence is the loudest scream." Now again. The defense claimed artistic expression. Nick was writing a screenplay, his lawyer insisted, not confessing to murder. But the judge didn't look convinced. And neither did the jury pool. The look on Romy's face. Let's not forget Romy. She sat in the second row the entire time, face stone still, eyes locked on her brother. When Nick said those 5 words, she didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She simply looked away, like she had heard it before. That moment spoke louder than any testimony. Because what could be more damning than the silent heartbreak of your own sister? A strategy or a suicide note? Nick's legal team left the courthouse in chaos. One reporter yelled, "Do you really believe your client is innocent?" His lawyer responded, "What I believe doesn't matter. What we can prove does." Cryptic, cold, and oddly reminiscent of Nick's tone. Are they playing a game here? Is this about justice or about image? And behind closed doors, what was Nick saying to his team? We may never know. But what we do know is that someone in the courtroom that day saw something the rest of us missed. Because 24 hours later, an anonymous tip was sent to the district attorney's office. The message read, "If you want the truth about that night, you need to listen to the Reiner Family Smart Speaker archives. There's a voice you haven't heard yet." And what they uncovered wasn't just another recording. It was a confession, but not from who you'd expect. What if the murder wasn't about family at all? What if Rob Reiner wasn't the only target, but just the beginning? Let's face it, when most people heard that Rob and Michelle Reiner were murdered in their Brentwood home, the assumption was simple. This was a domestic tragedy, an unstable son, a moment of madness. But that's not the only theory. And as investigators dug deeper, something unsettling began to surface. Rob Reiner had enemies. Real ones. Not just people who disliked his movies. People with power. People with vendettas. People who didn't want his voice echoing in politics, Hollywood, or the press. And when you look closely, you begin to see a different kind of motive. One that goes far beyond bloodlines. The power of Rob Reiner. To understand the danger Rob might have been in, you need to understand the power he held and the influence he wielded. We're not talking about the Princess Bride here. We're talking politics. In the last 10 years of his life, Rob Reiner transformed from beloved filmmaker to vocal activist. His foundation, American Foundation for Equal Rights, pushed the envelope on LGBTQ rights, campaign finance reform, gun control, and media accountability. He openly criticized sitting U.S. presidents. He funded opposition research on political candidates. He had private meetings with lawmakers. He wasn't just a celebrity. He was a threat. Stay out of it, Rob. In a series of leaked emails from 2023, uncovered during a media investigation into Reiner's political activity, one chilling message was revealed. Subject line, "Stay out of it, Rob." The sender? An untraceable encrypted email address. The content? No one cares what you think. You had your time. Don't poke around in places that don't concern you. The timing? Just 1 week after Rob publicly announced he'd fund an expose into a political PAC accused of laundering campaign money. Coincidence? Or warning? Missing cameras, missing files. Now here's where things start to get weird. Remember the blackout in the Brentwood Estates security footage? We mentioned it went out from 9:13 p.m. to 9:30 p.m., the exact window during which the murders took place. But what wasn't reported publicly until much later was that Rob's office computer was wiped clean. That's right. A forensic audit by the LAPD Cyber Division revealed that several encrypted drives in Rob's private study, the room where he worked on his documentary projects, had been remotely accessed just hours after his death. Not by Nick, not by anyone physically inside the house, but by an external signal routed through a VPN traced to Moldova. Now let's pause here. Why would someone wipe Rob's encrypted research drives hours after he died? Unless there was something on them, something someone didn't want seen. The documentary that vanished. Here's a detail most people missed. Before his death, Rob had been working on a documentary about corruption in Hollywood's political donations. He hinted at it in a 2024 podcast interview, saying, "It's a story people won't want told, but it's coming, and the names will shock you." The working title? Shadow Money, The Price of Silence. But after his death, the project vanished. No production team, no backups, no registered LLC. Just a shell company listed as RR Productions, SM1. And here's the kicker. The lead researcher Rob was working with, a young woman named Danica Blake, disappeared 2 weeks before his murder. Gone. No social media, no public statement, no confirmed location. Some believe she fled. Others believe she didn't get the chance. Was Rob onto something? Now ask yourself this. Could Rob's murder, and Michelle's, have been part of something much bigger? A silencing? A warning? A message? Because if this was a simple case of parricide, why would external parties be wiping data? Why would unnamed foreign IPs be tracking his emails? Why would a documentary project disappear overnight? The DA hasn't confirmed this angle publicly, but 2 former LAPD detectives turned consultants, who requested anonymity, claimed they were approached by a private intelligence firm weeks before the murder. They were asked to run a background threat assessment on Rob Reiner. Their conclusion? Rob had poked the wrong beehive. Nick's unlikely defense. Here's where things twist again. After the prosecution entered Nick's diary into evidence, the defense made a bold claim in pretrial motions. Nick didn't act alone. In fact, he may not have acted at all. According to his lawyers, Nick claimed that other people had been in the house that night, people who wanted his father silenced. He claimed his mother found out about the documentary and was scared, that she'd begged Rob to stop digging. That claim was initially laughed off, until an email surfaced. Michelle's warning. 1 day before the murders, Michelle sent an email to her longtime friend, actress and producer Marla Teschner. In it, she wrote, "Rob won't stop. He thinks he's doing the right thing, but I can feel it closing in. There are people watching. This doesn't feel like paranoia anymore. I've seen the same car drive by 3 nights in a row." That email was never intended for public release. But when Teschner came forward with it, the case took a massive turn. Because it didn't come from Nick. It came from Michelle, a woman with no history of mental illness, no reason to fabricate fear. And suddenly, the narrative shifted. The possible fall guy. What if Nick was being set up? What if someone knew he was volatile, unstable? What if they used him, planted the knife, triggered a breakdown, let him take the fall? After all, what better suspect than a son with a documented history of mental health struggles, an eviction notice looming, and a journal full of rage? Too convenient? Maybe. But stranger things have happened in Hollywood. And as we've seen time and again, power protects itself. The enemies list. Several figures Rob had targeted in his documentary had reason to stay quiet. A studio executive allegedly linked to illegal campaign donations. A former senator turned media mogul. A real estate investor with deep ties to foreign money laundering. All names now buried in NDAs and legal protections. None have commented publicly on Rob's death. And all, according to a leak from the documentary's treatment draft, were being investigated by Rob's team in the months before the murder. So who really killed Rob and Michelle? It's the question echoing across the country. Was it Nick? An unhinged son with a grudge? Was it someone else? A professional? A contractor? A warning? Was it both? Was Nick manipulated into exploding, the perfect patsy? Or was Michelle the real target? Her death was more brutal than Rob's. More frenzied. More personal. And let's not forget, she was the one who wanted to stop the project. But what came next would upend everything. Because just when the conspiracy theory started to grow cold, LAPD analysts recovered a backup, a deleted file, buried in Rob's cloud, a single voice note. And the person speaking on that recording was not Nick. Was not Michelle, but someone else. Someone the public didn't even know was involved. Until now. What if the real story of the Reiner murders happened during the only time we can't account for? What if those missing 17 minutes were never supposed to be found? 9:13 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. It's a tiny sliver of time. 17 minutes. But in the Reiner case, those 17 minutes are a gaping black hole. A blackout in a home wired with state-of-the-art security, smart sensors, and backup surveillance feeds. A hole that just happens to line up exactly with the murders of Rob and Michelle Reiner. Coincidence? Not a chance. Let's break down what happened, or didn't happen, during those missing minutes. Because buried in that void is a mystery more chilling than the crime itself. When the lights went dark, the Reiner estate had an advanced smart home system installed in early 2023. Cameras at every entrance, motion sensors in the hallways, audio alerts, even pressure plates beneath select floor tiles. The system was monitored by a third-party service called Everguard Secure, one of the most expensive private security firms in Los Angeles. Their tech promised uninterrupted surveillance, which is why it was so alarming when, at 9:13 p.m. on the night of the murders, everything went offline. No warning, no malfunction report, just total blackout. Even the system's failsafe, a backup battery that activates during outages, didn't kick in. Investigators initially assumed power failure. But the rest of the neighborhood was fully lit. No outages reported within a 2-mile radius. So what caused it? The official report used a word that raised eyebrows. Manual interference. Translation? Someone inside the house, someone with access to the system's internal panel, turned everything off. Who had access? According to Everguard's records, only 4 people had the passcode to the system's administrative panel. Rob Reiner, Michelle Reiner, the estate manager, Felix Hutton. Nick Reiner. Let's take Felix off the board for a moment. He was in Palm Springs with his wife that night. GPS, hotel receipts, and multiple witness confirmations all check out. That leaves 3. Rob, Michelle, Nick. Rob and Michelle are dead. Nick is the prime suspect. But here's the kicker. The system wasn't just shut down. It was erased. That's right. Logs wiped. Event history deleted. Even motion sensor triggers purged. Someone didn't just want to avoid detection. They wanted no record that detection was ever possible. And this was an amateur hour. It took LAPD's Digital Forensics Unit 6 days to recover a partial data cache from the system's encrypted memory. What they found raised more questions than answers. The 9:12 ping. 1 minute before the blackout, a motion sensor pinged in the downstairs hallway. Just one. The alert showed brief movement outside Rob's study. Then, black. The next alert wasn't until 9:31 p.m., when Lupe Delgado entered through the service door and triggered the kitchen sensor. Nothing in between. 17 minutes. A void. And yet, the mirror device that changed everything. Here's where the story gets weirder. Because while the main system failed, there was one device no one counted on. A backup. Hidden. Almost forgotten. Rob Reiner had a mirror-smart device, a biometric fitness scanner mounted in his home gym. It tracked his heart rate, posture, and voice commands. It had its own independent cloud backup. No one remembered it was there, until LAPD's tech team dug deeper. At first, the file looked corrupted. The timestamp was odd, 9:18 p.m., right in the middle of the blackout. But after hours of recovery, they got audio, and what they heard was chilling. The audio file. A transcript of the recovered 9:18 p.m. audio log reads as follows. Male voice, Rob Reiner. I told you, this ends tonight. Unknown male voice. It doesn't end unless you stop digging. Female voice, Michelle Reiner. We're not afraid of you. Unknown male voice. You should be. Then a scuffle, glass breaking, a short scream, and silence. Who was the unknown voice? That's the million-dollar question. It wasn't Nick. At least, not according to voice analysis. LAPD's forensic lab ran comparisons between the unknown voice and known samples of Nick's voice from phone calls, court statements, and video interviews. The result? Inconclusive, but likely not Nick Reiner. The cadence was different. Tone deeper. Accent, slightly Eastern European. Now wait. Didn't we already mention a Moldova-based VPN in Chapter 4? Yep. Same pattern. Same geographic digital fingerprint. Coincidence again? Not likely. Who else had access to the house? This is where things start to get shady. Because just 1 week before the murders, a security technician from Evergard visited the estate for a scheduled system upgrade. His name? Leonid Kravik. Ukrainian-American. 32 years old. Hired subcontractor. Passed background check. But here's the problem. After the murders, he vanished. Quit his job. Left his apartment. No forwarding address. Phone disconnected. And one more detail. He was last seen leaving the Reiner estate with an external hard drive in his backpack. Witness testimony from next door. A neighbor, 84-year-old Muriel Schultz, came forward days after the murders with what she called a weird detail. She said she heard a low-pitched humming sound at exactly 9:15 p.m. coming from the direction of the Reiner house. Not shouting, not breaking glass. A humming, like a generator. Or maybe a jamming device. That's the current theory. Experts now believe a signal jammer may have been used to disrupt outgoing security alerts and cloud backups during the attack. And who'd know how to use that? A trained tech. Someone like Leonid. But where was Nick? Here's where the suspicion still tightens around the sun. Because according to the recovered logs from his smartwatch, synced with his fitness app, Nick's heart rate spiked at 9:14 p.m., held steady at a dangerously elevated 143 BPM, and returned to baseline by 9:28 p.m. That suggests physical exertion. Running? Fighting? Murder? His defense claims he was having a panic attack. That he'd been triggered by a conversation with Michelle earlier that evening and was pacing, hyperventilating, and in emotional distress. But prosecutors disagree. It's the only moment in weeks his data shows sustained physical stress, they argued in court. And it just happens to line up with the window in which both parents were murdered? Hard to ignore, especially when there's no alibi, no cameras, no witnesses, no excuses. So here's what we're left with. A complete security blackout. Emotion alert moments before it happened. An unknown voice threatening Rob and Michelle. A missing subcontractor with access to the system. Nick's elevated vitals. And a double homicide that fits perfectly into a 17-minute window. Too neat? Maybe. But then came one final twist. The call that never happened. According to phone records, Rob tried to place a call at 9:16 p.m., just 3 minutes into the blackout. The number? A private line registered to a known investigative journalist at the Los Angeles Chronicle. The call never connected. Signal interference. Possibly jammed. But the reporter, Catherine Ray, confirmed that Rob had contacted her 3 days prior. He had promised to deliver something that would expose everything. They were supposed to meet the day after he was killed. So who's hiding what? Let's put this together. Rob had dirt on powerful people. Michelle wanted him to stop. A tech vanished after gaining access to their system. A voice not belonging to Nick was captured mid-blackout. Nick's heart rate suggests involvement. And the only evidence that survived was never supposed to. Which leaves us with the biggest question of all. If Nick didn't act alone, who helped him? And why are they still free? The answer? Might be in the letter Rob Reiner gave police, just 2 days after the funeral. And what it said changes everything. What happens when the last surviving member of a family steps forward and tells the truth no one else would dare say out loud. Until now, Rob Reiner had stayed quiet. No interviews, no press conferences, no Twitter threads. The daughter of Rob and Michelle Reiner, and the older sister of Nick, Romy kept her silence while tabloids circled like vultures and the courtroom turned into a media circus. People speculated she was too grief-stricken to speak. Others believed she was scared, that she knew more than she was letting on. But then, 2 days after her parents' funeral, she walked into the LAPD's Wilshire division and handed them a letter, folded, handwritten, signed at the bottom, Nick. And what it revealed would change the direction of the entire case. A family under siege. Let's back up for a moment. Romy and Nick were never close. Not publicly. While Nick struggled through rehab stints and accusations of entitlement, Romy built a quiet life in the indie film world. She stayed under the radar. Her art was weird, poetic, sometimes dark, but never dramatic. She was the normal one, the adult, the stable child of a Hollywood legacy. But privately, sources say she carried the weight of the entire family. She was the one Michelle called at 2 a.m. crying after Nick had another outburst. The one Rob asked for advice when Nick wouldn't speak to him for weeks. The one who offered to move Nick into a separate apartment and was overruled. She knew where the fault lines were, and she also knew where the bodies were buried. Figuratively. Until now. The funeral incident. Rob and Michelle's funeral was private. Only 42 guests. No press. Tight security. But that didn't stop one scandal from breaking through. Halfway through the service, as Romy was finishing her speech about her parents' legacy, a shadow appeared in the doorway. Nick, uninvited, accompanied by his attorney and 2 bodyguards. Gasps echoed through the chapel. One mourner stood up and whispered, "Is this a joke?" Another broke into tears. Nick didn't say anything. He just stood at the back and stared at Romy, at the caskets, at the stained glass windows like he was expecting them to shatter. He didn't approach. He didn't speak. But Romy saw something in his eyes, and that's when she decided to tell the police everything. The letter. When Romy delivered the handwritten letter to police, she told the detective, "He left it in my mailbox the night before the funeral. No envelope. Just this." The letter was 4 pages long. Nick's handwriting was erratic, rushed, words crossed out, some sentences repeated. Some lines trailed off into scribbles. But the message was clear. He didn't act alone. And even more shocking, he claimed he had tried to stop it. "I didn't want it to happen this way," the letter read. "I begged them to leave. I told them something was coming. But Dad wouldn't back down. Mom said it was all in my head. They didn't see what I saw. And then I wasn't in control anymore." Who is them? That's what investigators wanted to know. Who was Nick talking about? Begged them to leave? I wasn't in control anymore. The phrasing was vague, cryptic. But in the margin, scrawled in jagged print, was a single name. Leo. Sound familiar? It should. Because in Chapter 5, we learned about Leonid Kravik, the tech who worked for Everguard. The same man who vanished after performing a routine upgrade on the Reiner estate security system. The man last seen leaving the property with a hard drive. And now, Nick was naming him. Romy's police statement. In her statement to LAPD, Romy added something else. Something not in the letter. She said Nick had been terrified in the weeks leading up to the murders. That he had started sending her cryptic text messages like, "You'll see. It's not me. He's here already. Don't trust the wires." She thought he was hallucinating. She brushed it off as another spiral. But the night before the blackout, Nick sent her a voice message. It lasted 9 seconds. We only know what it said because Romy played it in the interview. Nick's voice. "They're not here for me anymore. They're here for Dad. It's going to happen. I think tonight." She never replied. She deleted the message. And after the funeral, when he showed up and stood silently at the back of the chapel, she realized he had come to say goodbye. Not to their parents. To her. Why did Romy wait? That's the question prosecutors had. Why didn't she come forward sooner? Why keep that letter hidden? Romy's answer? Because I didn't want to believe it. Because if what he said was true, then someone out there let it happen. Maybe even made it happen. And my parents died for nothing. She paused, then added, or worse, for something. The media explosion. Once the letter was mentioned in court filings, media outlets exploded with theories. Podcasts speculated whether Leo was a code name for someone else. Reddit sleuths created timelines overlaying Nick's texts with Leonid's known whereabouts. Twitter threads argued over whether Romy was protecting Nick or selling him out. But the truth is even more complicated, because after Romy gave her statement, she dropped another bombshell. She told LAPD she had found a hidden flash drive in Michelle's personal jewelry box 2 days before the murders. It was unlabeled, encrypted, and when cracked, contained a recording, Michelle's secret recording. On that drive was a single file, rrfinalcall.mp3, timestamped 3 days before her death. In it, Michelle can be heard whispering into a recorder. "I'm making this in case something happens. Rob won't stop. Nick says we're being watched." I didn't believe it until now. I found the note under the door this morning. It just said, "You're making powerful people nervous. Stay out." Then there's a pause. Then she adds, "If anything happens, it wasn't an accident." That file was admitted into evidence. And suddenly, the courtroom shifted. Because this wasn't just a case of a broken family anymore. It was a puzzle. With too many missing pieces and too many people trying to hide them. Romy's interview. The world hears her speak. 3 weeks later, Romy gave a single interview to veteran journalist Tessa Molina, aired on national television. Sitting in a black dress, hands clasped, voice trembling, Romy looked into the camera and said, "My brother is not innocent. But he's not the only guilty one." Tessa asked her if she believed Nick killed their parents. Her response? "I believe Nick knew it was going to happen. I believe he didn't stop it. I believe he wanted to. But I also believe he was scared of something worse." Then came the final question. "Do you forgive him?" Romy stared ahead, then whispered, "Not yet." But what came next would rip this case wide open. Because just as the public began to accept Romy's truth, a new tape surfaced. This one, not from Nick, not from Michelle, but from a neighbor's home assistant device. And the voice it captured was from someone police had never questioned. Until now. What if the real story was never in the headlines, but hidden in their inboxes? What if Rob and Michelle Reiner knew exactly what was coming and still didn't run? Every relationship has secrets, even one that looks perfect from the outside. Even between two people married for nearly 40 years, beloved by millions, and known as one of Hollywood's most stable couples. But the emails between Rob and Michelle Reiner? They reveal something most people never saw. Not tension, not conflict, fear. The kind of fear that creeps in through the floorboards, that gnaws at the edge of your sanity, that makes you look at your own home and wonder if it's about to turn into your grave. These weren't just private messages between husband and wife. They were warnings, panic buttons pressed in slow motion. And when investigators accessed their cloud-stored emails, they found something no one expected. A thread of desperation. A digital breadcrumb trail that led straight to the truth. The inboxes. Rob and Michelle each had personal accounts, separate from their work or foundation emails. These were private. They didn't use them for business. They used them for each other. Hundreds of emails, mostly mundane. Subject lines like, "Dinner tonight. Found your glasses again. Don't forget Romy's birthday gift." But then everything changed. Around November 2024, the tone of their exchanges shifted. The emails got shorter, more cryptic, laced with tension. And then the subject lines began to read. "Saw him again today. Still parked outside. Do you think it's a bluff?" The first alarm. On November 12th, Michelle sent Rob the following. "The man with the black jacket. Same one. Third time this week. Parked across from the gate at 8:23 a.m. Pretending to be on his phone. I don't think it's nothing anymore." Rob's response. "I'll ask Lou if the cameras picked anything up. Maybe we're being paranoid. But yeah, I've seen him too." Lou was their longtime driver and part-time security consultant. He confirmed he'd seen the same man. Mid-30s. Shaved head. Foreign accent. But when LAPD checked nearby traffic cams, no trace. Not on the street. Not at that time. Nothing. Either they were wrong, or someone had already tampered with surveillance that far back. The name no one mentioned. 3 weeks before the murder, Rob sent Michelle an email with no subject line. Inside, it simply said, "Leo is not who he says he is. Look into it." We know who Leo refers to now, Leonid Kravik, the tech subcontractor. But what did Rob discover? We still don't know. No follow-up emails mention Leonid again. Which raises the question, was the account hacked? Were Rob and Michelle erasing their own digital trail? Or was someone else doing it for them? The Plan B email. The most disturbing email in the entire inbox was one that was never sent. A draft written by Michelle at 2:37 a.m. on January 3rd, 5 days before she died. It was titled, Plan B. It reads, "If we're not safe here, then what are we doing? Rob won't stop. He thinks he's untouchable, but the walls are closing in. Nick is acting strange again. He says they're watching the wires. What does that even mean? I can't tell what's paranoia anymore. But I know this. We need to go? We need to vanish for a while, just until the documentary is finished." Then it ends abruptly. The last sentence is half-written. "I don't want Romy to KN." That's it. Was she about to say she didn't want Romy to know? To protect her? To keep her in the dark? We'll never know, because that draft was never sent. It sat in her outbox, unread, forgotten, until after her death. Husband and wife divided. As investigators combed through the emails, a pattern emerged. Michelle wanted to run. Rob wanted to fight. He was the defiant one. The man who'd made a career out of standing up to powerful figures. She was the realist, the one who knew the price of pushing too hard. On January 5th, Michelle wrote, "You're not hearing me. This isn't about truth anymore. This is about survival." Rob replied, "If we don't tell the story, who will?" Those may have been his final written words to her. A manifesto in a sentence. But courage, in this case, may have been fatal. The last email Rob ever sent. At 7:04 p.m. on the night of the murder, 2 hours before he died, Rob sent one final message. It was to his lawyer. Subject line, contingency. Body. "If anything happens to us, make sure the backup goes to Ray. No delays." Ray refers to Catherine Ray, the journalist he trusted with his investigation. The same one he tried to call at 9:16 p.m. during the blackout. But the email bounced back. The server showed no errors. But Ray never received it. Either it was intercepted or erased. And just like that, the contingency vanished. But why keep these emails? That's the haunting contradiction. If Rob and Michelle suspected they were in danger, why leave behind this trail? Why not destroy the drafts? Delete the inboxes? Some believe they wanted someone to find them. That these messages were breadcrumbs. A map leading to the truth. Others think they never believed it would actually happen. That they were scared, but not enough. That they underestimated what they were up against. And that mistake cost them their lives. But then came a stranger email. From Nick. Yes, Nick. He rarely used email. Text, sure. Calls, not often. But investigators discovered one unsent message in his drafts folder, dated January 6th, the day before the murders. It was addressed to no one. No recipient. No subject. It read, "They're coming. Not for me. For him. She's in the way now. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for any of this." Again, cryptic. Half confession. Half plea. But what sealed the chill? The email ends with, 17 minutes is all they need. Wait, 17 minutes? We know now that the blackout lasted exactly 17 minutes. And Nick referenced it before it happened. Which means what? That he knew it was coming? That he knew someone had that time window and a plan? That one sentence, buried in a forgotten draft, could be the smoking gun that links everything. The security system blackout. The mysterious Leo. The staged cover-up. The orchestrated murders. And what happened next would shake the investigation to its core. Because just as detectives began to piece the emails together, a neighbor came forward. Their home assistant had been recording. And what it captured wasn't just audio. It was a name. A name no one expected to hear. Not in this case. Not in this neighborhood. Not in this family. What if the killer confessed and no one noticed? What if the voice that echoed through the Reiner estate wasn't just threatening, but chillingly honest? In high-profile murder cases, the smoking gun is rarely literal. It's a whisper, a glance, a recording no one expected. And in the Reiner double homicide, that moment arrived with a ding. A soft notification tone from a smart speaker in the house next door. It was an Amazon Echo. A standard model tucked into a corner of a granite kitchen counter, owned by a retired schoolteacher named Patricia Avery. She lived alone, quiet, had no idea her device had captured anything important, until her nephew came over to help set up her new phone. He was testing her Alexa's pairing function, scrolled through audio logs, and found a strange file. Timestamp, January 7th, 9:19 p.m. right in the middle of the Reiner estate's 17-minute blackout. At first, it sounded like background noise. Distant voices. Muffled. But as the volume was adjusted, something eerie came into focus. A male voice. Cold. Calm. Unshaken. And what he said made Patricia call the police. The tape. Here's a transcript of the clearest portion of the audio, confirmed by LAPD audio forensic analysis. Male voice. They told you to stop. He told you to stop. But you wouldn't, would you? Female voice. Believed to be Michelle Reiner. This is our home. You're trespassing. Male voice. This stopped being your home the second you turned it into a spotlight. Male voice. Believed to be Rob Reiner. You don't scare me. Male voice. That's the problem. Then there's a pause. A long, breathless pause. Then a scream. Not blood-curdling. Not cinematic. A small, helpless cry. And the sound of glass shattering. The voice that didn't belong.